A warm welcome to Debating Russia here on Voice of Russia. I'm your moderator, Peter Lavelle. With Edward Snowden still out of sight in Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport, there's no shortage of controversy. Western media and political establishment continue their campaign to destroy Snowden's character. Others demand a real public discussion on the surveillance state. To discuss this, I'm joined by my guest in London, Peter Tatchell. He's a human rights activist and a founder of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. We also have Charlie Wolf, has been on this program before. He's a UK-based American broadcast journalist and a political commentator. And here with me in Moscow is Veronika Krashenikova. She's General Director of the Institute for Foreign Policy Research and Initiatives. Okay, Peter, a hero, a traitor, Mr. Snowden.
Well, some people may say that Edward Snowden is a traitor, but to me, he's a human rights hero. He has defended our right to privacy and exposed massive state surveillance by both US and British spy agencies, affecting millions of people worldwide. The right to privacy is a very important human right and should only be breached in the most extreme circumstances. Quite clearly, blanket snooping, just generalized, non-discriminate eavesdropping is not justified. And of course, it is in violation of the US Constitution, which protects American citizens against unwarranted, unjustified state interference in their private lives. So, to me, he has done a great public service. He has brought a light to shine upon what the secret state is doing in the name of the American people, and which of course is impacting on people worldwide who are also being put under surveillance. He is truly a hero, and instead of focusing on him and trying to apprehend him, the United States authorities should be questioning why they're putting so many millions of people worldwide under surveillance.
Okay, whistleblower then. Charlie?
Well, I think the jury is still out on whether he's a whistleblower or a hero or a villain. He is definitely broken the Espionage Act. That's without a doubt. At least he's suspected of doing so. In large part, it's a pleasure to be here with Peter, because as much as we disagree, we probably agree in more ways than he would expect. And, I value the Fourth Amendment as an American, as much as I value the Second and the First and the Fifth and the rest of them. But I'm not sure, several terms are being thrown around, such as eavesdropping, snooping, etc. As I understand the program, and as I've seen it from watching the testimony, that's not what the program is about. It is about the collection of data. And there's a difference there. This is not listening to someone's conversations. This is not protected information. They use what's known as the envelope rule. In other words, if you write a letter, I can't read what's inside the envelope. That's private. That's between you and whoever. But I can read the address on the front of the envelope. So they're collecting numbers, telephone numbers, which there's an oversight program. Remember, the program was developed under the Bush administration, which was Republican. It's been continued under a wholly different administration, under the Democrats, under Mr. Obama. It's had oversight from the Congress. And most importantly, the standard that protects us against the Constitution is the courts. And the courts have overseen this, and they don't seem to have a problem. Now,
yeah, but Charlie, everything you said there is all nice and fine, so why was it secret?
Well, actually, it wasn't. I mean, countries do have a right for their security to state secrets. I think that is an accepted norm. But the program actually wasn't as secret as people suspect. USA Today did a large feature on it in 2007. I think what Mr. Snowden has done, where I have a problem, is a true whistleblower, to me, would not have run off to the People's Republic of China or Hong Kong. They would not have run off to Russia or gone to Ecuador. A true whistleblower would have stayed in the United States, and there's many avenues he could have easily gone to. First off, there's the Inspector General's office. There's oversight committees in the Congress. He could have gone to Woodward and Bernstein. Bob Woodward is still around. I think he knows a thing or two about whistleblowers.
Veronica, go ahead.
Which he did.
He went to the Washington Post.
Indeed. So that's the strict definition of whistleblower.
Let's go with Veronica here in Moscow.
So indeed, as a true whistleblower, Edward Snowden went to the very American newspaper, the Washington Post, and to the very British Guardian. Yes, you go somewhere else when you're a whistleblower and a human rights hero, for which I agree with Peter. And in fact, there has been a long history of Americans and Western citizens in general courageously denouncing U.S. anti-constitutional activities, terror, and wars. And millions of Americans took to the streets during the Vietnam War and 10 years ago during the preparations for the war in Iraq and on other occasions.
And with the exception of Jane Fonda, they didn't go to the enemy to do that. With the exception of Jane Fonda.
Who's the enemy? Who's the enemy here?
Denounced fascist.
Veronica, let's ask who's the enemy here?
Well, I think China and the USSR, Russia, I should say, are obviously not.
There you go.
Are not allies.
Well done, Charlie.
Going to a country that has very few human rights, such as China or Russia, where journalists don't have rights, as China or Russia, where cyber hacking is a major problem. There is no transparency. It just doesn't
Gitmo
seem.
Gitmo on the American ledger is a positive or a negative?
Gitmo has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So, and that's transparent.
There's no human rights violations. This is changing the subject.
No, you're the one who's changing the subject. And again, you think that Russia doesn't do espionage. You think that China doesn't do espionage. The UK doesn't do espionage. Where I have a problem.
Not on such scale.
Wait a minute. What do you mean on such scale?
Russia. We're not spying on American citizens, and we're not spying on Russian citizens.
Yes, you do, and you know you do. And the Chinese look and read emails.
Yeah,
Peter, go ahead.
I think what Edward Snowden did was exposed a secret, hidden spy system. He didn't reveal state secrets. He exposed the system, which was not general public knowledge and had not been given the consent of the American people, nor, as far as I know, was it ever debated and agreed by Congress. Now, it's said by Charlie that, the authorities can't open the envelope. They can only collect the envelope and see who it was sent from or to. But the point is, how would we feel? It's sort of the equivalent of a spy agency saying, well, look, I'm going to come to your house and put all your personal papers in cardboard boxes, cart them away, and keep them for 30 days or however long, and perhaps I'll give them back to you when I'm finished. That is an invasion of privacy. And, I agree that in the case of evidence that someone is engaged or preparing acts of terrorism, of course, that person should be rightfully put under surveillance. But in this case, the PRISM program is indiscriminate. It's mixing genuine threats to national security with ordinary citizens. And that is a very dangerous slippery slope down which to go. It's the slippery slope that leads to a big brother society where we are all under state surveillance.
And listen, in large part, I agree with you. Like I said, we're going to agree on more things than we probably give credit to ourselves. And I worry about that too. However, I have to put some faith at some level, as much as I distrust governments, and I'm, a conservative, the government that governs least governs best. But at some level, you have to put faith in the Constitution and in our representatives, and you have to balance it against what's going on. We have a security threat since 9/11, and right now I enjoy the freedoms I have, which I would not have if we were under attack as we were on 9/11. So you have to have some level of trust. And yes, a government can abuse any program. We have standing armies. They don't attack us. We haven't had, military coups in this country or the United States. We arm our police in the United States. Can be abuse. It's generally rooted out. There's not major abuse. So until I see where there's been an abuse, and that's the one thing with Snowden, from everything he's brought out, I have not seen any malfeasance or abuse of the system. And the way he's done it is where I have a problem.
This is the voice of Russia.
You're listening to Debating Russia here on Voice of Russia. Veronica, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I have an important statement to make. We have to take human rights seriously. Human rights are a universal value, and no country can have a monopoly on human rights and judge other countries. So on behalf of Russian civil society and human rights organizations, and also as a member of the Civic Chamber, I would formulate a proposal. We should write a letter to President Putin asking him to allow Edward Snowden stay in Moscow as long as necessary, because elsewhere he is under danger of life sentence or worse. So I think if he came to us for help, for protection, we have to do maximum to help such a person.
Mr. Snowden probably would not be overjoyed to have to stay here, because then his entire purpose would be defeated. When you look at Western media, Western elites Mr. McCainiac from the United States in the Senate, I mean, he'll just say he was a traitor, and
Still
it will destroy his agenda. Go
I
ahead.
don't think so, Peter, because still the first place he went to is the American media and British media as well. And this is what an honest American citizen does. So that will not be changed by the time he, a posteriori, now stays in Russia. So he did it the right way. And he is with the American people against the state apparatus that actually breaks constitutional laws and also surveils citizens of the entire world. How many millions of Russians have been subject to these systems? So I think the destiny of Edward Snowden is important to the American people, to Russians, and to people in the world.
It's interesting you
Well,
mentioned
I think we have to look at...
Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
I think we have to look at Edward Snowden's motive. Quite clearly, he was not out to profit financially anyway, personally. Quite clearly, he did not give this information to an enemy state. He didn't liaise with the secret services of any other country. Clearly, his motive is idealistic. He believes in democracy. He believes in the accountability of the American government to the American people. And I would say that he's a great patriot in the tradition of the founding fathers of the United States, who argued that they should have a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And transparency and accountability is fundamental to that. He didn't hide away and do this. He didn't do it in secret. He was open and transparent, unlike this secret spying operation, the PRISM program. The other point I'd make is that if Edward Snowden was an Iranian who had blown the whistle on Tehran's mass snooping of citizens around the world, he would be hailed by the United States as a freedom fighter, as a whistleblower, as a hero, a defender of democracy and liberty.
Yeah, but with respect,
so there's huge double standards here by the United States.
With
Go ahead,
respect,
Charlie.
it's not a double standard.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I'm here. It's not so much a double standard. I think there's a moral relativism that you're playing. I don't believe that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. I think there is some motive in him that maybe I think was misguided, but in his mind probably was sincere. But when you take 4 laptops full of state secrets, and we don't know what he's taken and who he's endangered, and you bring it to a country that's known for hacking computers like the Chinese aren't going to put someone up, or the Russians for that matter, Mr. Putin is not going to put someone up just out of altruistic means. Like I said, I have a lot of respect.
That's why it's not happening, because the problem is
Mr.
Russian
Snowden.
Government's made it very clear.
Problem is Mr. Snowden, unfortunately, has become a political pawn. And the Russians and the Chinese and all these people have their own price. Let's talk reality. He would have done far better staying in the United States and going to the Congress. And actually, and again, Peter, I'm sure you've read Civil Disobedience by Thoreau.
Believe that?
Yes, I do. If you've read Civil Disobedience by Thoreau, let me finish. Thoreau said the best place for a just man in an unjust society, the only just place is in a prison cell. And I know you would, on matters that are important to you, on gay rights, etc., would happily sit down in the street and be carted off to jail to prove civil disobedience and to prove your point. And I think that's what I would have respected him more if he had not stolen other state secrets and if the Times didn't hear him, or I should say the Guardian and the Post didn't hear him, he could have gone to other papers. He could have stood up on the steps of the Capitol and he could have shouted it, and he would have found some senator that would have given him a hearing. This is why I have a problem with what happened. And now we're talking more about Snowden than we are about the program.
You had 2 senators really wanting to talk about this, to have a public debate, and Snowden has actually made that happen. So, Charlie, you addressed Peter there in London. Peter, do you want to respond?
Well, I think, what's really important to keep on bearing in mind is that this secret spying system took place without the consent of the American people and without the explicit approval of Congress. And that is not democracy. In a democracy, those who have state power need to be accountable. When it comes to Edward Snowden's reasons for going to Hong Kong and then to Russia, I can understand that because he, as Veronica's mentioned, is likely to have, if he'd stayed in the United States, he's likely to have ended up like Bradley Manning, spending many months or years held in pretrial detention and suffering considerable abuses. I mean, according to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, what happened to Bradley Manning for 9 months in Quantico prison was tantamount to torture, and that is an abuse of human rights. He would face, if he stayed in the United States, the prospect of life imprisonment. I think it's entirely understandable that he sought to escape apprehension, and I hope that he managed and succeeds in remaining free, because I think he has much more to tell, and he wouldn't be able to tell it, not about state secrets, but about the system, the systematic abuse of state power. He wouldn't be able to expose that and tell us that story if he was in detention in the United States.
But with respect, you mentioned Bradley Manning as if he's a whistleblower when he clearly wasn't. Bradley Manning's motive was he didn't get along with his troop mates. He was made fun of for either his sexuality
or
for
what. True.
Yes,
but
it
what
is.
about,
And he took.
but,
He wait a minute.
What,
He indiscriminately. Let's talk Manning. He indiscriminately downloaded I don't know how many thousands of files. He wasn't looking for malfeasance. He wasn't looking for abuses of power. He was saying, I'm going to just get back at these guys because I'm mad at them, and I'm going to throw my toys out of the pram, and I'm going to go and give this stuff to Julian Assange.
But
if there was a true motive, I'd have some respect for the guy.
But Bradley Manning, that was not
Charlie,
his motive.
what do you think?
If you read his own
gentlemen?
personal testimony, you see that
Then
Bradley Manning
why did he
was
download
motivated
all
by
this stuff?
because he didn't have time to go through every single file.
So he was just fishing. He was just fishing.
And he found out a lot of really interesting information.
It was interesting stuff, but it wasn't, again, abuses or malfeasance.
Yes, it was.
There was no abuse.
There was the famous collateral
Well, what about
murder video.
killing civilian Iraqis?
There we go, Veronica. Here,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, let's look at that
Thanks
video.
to
that
Bradley
video.
Manning, the entire world saw how American soldiers what and how they did it in Iraq. And that famous shooting from the helicopter and American soldiers having fun at killing civilians. Disclosing such information is an act of civil heroism, I trust. And in fact, we're witnessing a new phenomenon. More and more often, American or Western in general citizens come out to speak for that America that is written in the Declaration of Independence. The America that stands up for those high principles of freedom, of human rights, of democracy, as you, Peter, was saying. And more and more Americans and other people in the world are appalled at a huge precipice that is between the American values and the real American policy. And indeed, a conscientious citizen can only be appalled at that. And those people, just as Julian Assange, as Bradley Manning, as Edward Snowden, they go to the American media first. And that's a major, I think it's a major phenomenon, and I think we should be all supportive of such true, real American citizens.
Don't take state secrets to people like the Chinese, where there is no human rights.
Which he hasn't done once again.
Well,
you can repeat it as many times as you wish, Charlie. It won't become true.
Veronica, you don't know that. He's had 4 laptops.
I definitely know that he went to the Washington Post first and to the Guardian, and he had a chance to speak. Would you go to Quantico for until the end of your life?
If it was that important, yes. If it was that important, yes.
Well, that's your choice.
And I don't expect that I would, because I would make sure I knew what I was talking about, and I wouldn't divulge state secrets. There's another principle. You talk a lot about high principles. Manning and Snowden have both taken oaths of when they went to work for these places. They took special oaths that they're not going to break the law, and they're taking
oaths
they
to
stole.
That America that is in the Constitution.
They stole.
The
No, wait a minute.
Citizens of its own country and many other countries in the world. It's a different America they are fighting for.
I don't mind having a debate, but when someone decides to take advantage of their position to further a debate, that's wrong. He's more than welcome to get on the world stage, to write a book, to do whatever it took to publish his cause, and then put it out in the free marketplace of ideas. He chose not to do that. He decided to take a leg up on his side of the argument.
Wouldn't be able to go to Quantico in his cell.
He wasn't going to go to Quantico.
Let me go to Peter in London. It's very interesting. I watch how the media is work this story here, and they say these programs were not illegal, but we just had yesterday the Voting Rights Act in the United States that for half a century protected minorities in voting, and a good portion of it was thrown out as being unconstitutional. And so what we have, these laws about surveillance, well, they're against the Constitution, they're against the Fourth Amendment, as you pointed out here. And I think this is what Snowden wanted to do. So my question is, in reaction to what Charlie just said here, there is a higher cause. It's not who you sign a piece of paper to your employer. These people are reckoning with the Constitution of the United States, and it's worth having a worthy discussion about it.
Well, absolutely. And if you look back to the Vietnam era, there were many heroic and courageous U.S. service personnel who blew the whistle on indiscriminate killings by American soldiers and indiscriminate bombing raids by the U.S. Air Force on civilian areas. Most people nowadays have a very different view from what they had way back then. Back then, they were called traitors, but nowadays, most people people with hindsight at least recognize that people who exposed those wrongdoings were in fact following their conscience and a higher law, which is international human rights law, which supersedes any national law or any decision by any court. And just because the Supreme Court has authorized this system does not make it right.
In our country, the U.S. Constitution is sovereign above any international agreement, and any international agreement has to comport with the U.S. Constitution before we sign up to it. So we have our human rights, and the courts does guard those, and those 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights are highly guarded. And that includes legal search and seizure. But again, and it's been explained, and I've listened to it with a tabula rasa, and I accepted it, and I'm not someone to give up on my Fourth Amendment rights, as I said earlier.
Your defense of the Supreme Court is misplaced, because for many years the Supreme Court accepted the denial of voting rights, the existence of segregation in the Deep South, and even right now the American courts deny equal rights to lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people. So the idea that the Supreme... Let me finish. The idea that the Supreme Court is this great guarantor of human rights is palpably nonsense.
They're the guarantor of the U.S. Constitution, and it's interesting we're bringing up this whole voting rights. All the Supreme Court did was said that these states have met these qualifications. That is not a problem anymore, but it is still open to Congress, if they felt it was, to bring back in voting rights. It's not needed. As Clarence Thomas said, we've moved on from 1965.
Why don't we have a debate on national security and surveillance then?
We can. You had General Keith Alexander, who's a highly respected person in Washington, respected on all sides, give testimony, and I'm glad to have any sort of debate on it.
He might have perjured
I don't think Keith Alexander perjured himself. No, I don't think Clapper was stupid in how he answered something, but again, I think he was set up. That's a side issue. I'm open to a debate. There's constitutionality, and then there's policy. Policy is what people politically will accept. Now, I'm a little bit disgusted that President Obama has not been out in front and made the case as to why we need this. I think there's a lot of misinformation that's gone around, and that's part of why there's been unctions against it. But I think, again, if it is explained, I don't see where it's breaking my Fourth Amendment rights. I don't have a problem. You watch a cop show, it's the first thing they do. Oh, well, was he in that hotel? Get his credit card information and his cell phone. That's all they're doing. They're holding it because they don't know necessarily who the criminal is until after the fact.
I want to go to Veronica here, because it seems to me with these programs in the United States that no one's really debating about is that everyone's guilty until proven innocent. Go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah, indeed, there is also the extradition aspect in this situation. So Russia has been asking for years the United States to extradite Ilyas Akhmatov, for example, and Ahmed Zakayev from Britain. Terrorists have been connected with very serious crime in Russia. The Cubans for the last 15 years have been fighting for the return of the Miami Five, the anti-terrorist intelligence officers who are in prison in the United States. But instead, the United States also harbor Luis Posada Carriles, who is also known as the Osama bin Laden of Latin America, who is involved in numerous terrorist attacks, and the Iran-Contra and the Bay of Pigs invasion, and a huge number of crimes. But the United States don't extradite such people.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point here, Peter. Is the Western media has really had a heyday with Russia's lack of giving up Mr. Snowden. And before you answer the question, I want to go at a quick break here. You're listening to Debating Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle. This is Voice of Russia. Go ahead, Peter.
I think my big concern is that once you create a system of state surveillance, then it is open to abuse. Right now, Charlie can say that the system is operating in a benign way, that he doesn't feel that his rights are being infringed. But once you create this system, it is there and can be subsequently abused. We saw this in Britain with the passage of the Public Order Act in 1986. It was initially introduced to combat football hooliganism, but now it is almost exclusively used to suppress peaceful and otherwise lawful protest. So there's a good example of how a well-intended law, once in place, has been used for an altogether different and malign purpose. And that's my concern about the PRISM system. There is not proper oversight. There's not independent oversight, and once you've got this system in place, I fear for how it could be abused in future.
We're almost out of time here. So let me ask you a quick question, and I want to give Veronica the last word here. Would you like to see another church commission about all of this?
I don't know if I need a church commission, but, I think there should be an open discussion on it, and we have. It's being debated in the press now in the United States. And, again, I hope Mr. Obama comes out and defends it a bit more assiduously than he has.
Okay, Veronica.
Last week, the Russian Federation Council, which is the upper chamber of the Russian parliament, has decided to set up a working group that would conduct an international investigation of this situation. And I want to reiterate that the Russian civil society and the human rights organization have to stand up for Mr. Snowden and ask President Putin and the Russian leadership to allow him to stay, because the threats to his life if he goes out are too high.
Peter, let me go to you. I'm back in London here. What would you like to see happen? Because Charlie says that there is a debate going on here. It seems to me most of it's still condemning Mr. Snowden and Russia and China and everybody else, but not real debate about these programs in the United States.
Well, if there is a debate about these issues, it's only thanks to Edward Snowden. If he hadn't done what he did, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And of course, you're right. Much of the discussion is about him and his actions, not about the systematic state surveillance that he's exposed. And I think that is a major, major flaw in the way in which the issue is being projected by the media. There are lots more questions to ask. We don't know for certain that the information gathered is simply being logged. We don't know if phone calls, emails, and social media messages are actually being read. We're told they're not being read. We're told that the PRISM program is merely logging who sent messages to who. We're told that they're not looking at the messages themselves. But how do we know that? We don't know it. I mean, this is a secret system which we were not told about. So maybe the operation of the system itself is not what we're being told.
Charlie, that's the point. It's the trust issue, isn't it? I mean, because we didn't know these programs existed, and then they say, oh, they do exist, and we're only doing this and this. But if we weren't told about these programs, then why should we believe what they say about these programs?
Well, I mean, we did know about these programs. As I mentioned earlier, USA Today ran a large piece on this in 2007, and you can't build something that's 5 times the size of the U.S. Capitol out in the Utah desert. Actually, it wasn't even in the desert. You pass by it on I-15 every day. I know Bluffdale. I used to live just south of there, and not know something's going on. But again, going back to the original question, I think Snowden has been his own worst enemy in the way he's done this. Again, going to China, he's made Snowden, and again, I go back to some of the work.
He went to Hong Kong, not to China.
Well, Hong Kong is still part of China. It is still ruled. You think the Chinese don't have a hand on what's going on
Hong
there?
Kong has basically very good human rights record.
Yeah, but as I was going to say, again, as a long-time campaigner, Peter, and you've developed iconic status, if I can say, but at the same time, I think you yourself would be dismayed if you started getting bigger than the story as opposed to the things you're campaigning for. And that was Snowden's mistake. There are many routes he could have gone. I was watching an interview with a chap who's a specialty lawyer, a specialty solicitor, who deals with nothing but whistleblowers, that protects whistleblowers, so he wouldn't have ended up in Quantico. There are ways of doing this where you will be heard and you can get your message out and you can start the debate. But taking U.S. secrets, not knowing what they are, that could endanger some of our agents in the field and our personnel, stealing states, that's taking away their free rights as well, their human liberties, and bringing these to countries that are not necessarily friendly to the United States. That doesn't, to me, further the cause of saying there's a giant spying program going on.
What state secrets has he reveled?
We don't know. Well, what he has, it's not so much what he's revealed. We don't know what he has and what's been taken from him. When again you go into countries like Hong Kong or to Russia, there's no free ride. These guys aren't just doing this out of altruism. I wouldn't show up with all that information on a laptop.
We don't know that yet, but it's very interesting, and I'm going to have to close the program on this here, is Mr. Snowden has released evidence that the United States spies on Hong Kong, spies on China, spies on Russia.
But so we know that. But you think Russia doesn't spy on us?
But he's playing his cards. Well, we don't have a whistleblower like that yet. We'll see.
But we know that. We know countries spy on each other.
We've run out of... They certainly do. We've run out of time. I want to thank my guests, Peter and Charlie in London. Thank you very much. And Veronica here in Moscow with me. You've been listening to Debating Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle. Please stay with Voice of Russia.
You're listening to the Voice of Russia from the heart of London. On weekdays, we broadcast live from 4 p.m. until 8. We'll bring you news, current affairs, features and debate. You can listen to us on digital radio and online. Visit ruvr.co.uk.